Awesome. So can you tell me, Dan, what makes a story more comprehensible?
Okay, that's really the million-dollar question here. Because like the short answer is that I don't know, and there's no real like empirical study that has found a way to quantitatively determine the reading level of a Latin text. I mean, there's research that's been done in English and other languages. Like there are all kinds of different like reading level scores based on various different like lexical and syntactic factors. But the fact of the matter is that we don't have anything like that for Latin. And as a result, we don't have a way of really ascertaining the reading level. Or as you've phrased it, the comprehensibility. And another issue is that like the nature of comprehensibility is that there is a comprehender. In other words, it's not like an absolute thing. It entirely depends on the individual who is on the receiving end of that message. So in other words, what's comprehensible to, let's say, my own students might not be comprehensible to yours or to yours, even given the same amount of Latin study that they've had. Yeah. So it's a very fraught and difficult question, but it's an important question and a crucial one. And like I feel that someone, now that novellas are a thing, I really feel that someone ought to like do a good old-fashioned like quantitative study about like what like the various factors that make one text more comprehensible than another in Latin. I would love to see that, but absent, what's that?
You're hired.
Absent that, I really, if I ever get a PhD, no, don't count on that. But like, yeah, it's difficult to really ascertain that. That being said, like you can do it subjectively. Like you can, and that's sort of what Dan Stoa has done on his blog, which I think is great, by the way. It's a great resource. You should all check it out, Comprehensible Antiquity. But it's a way of sort of like giving it an eye test and seeing where it sort of falls in a sort of hierarchy. So like in my personal opinion, what makes a text comprehensible? I mean, I believe that word count, it's a factor clearly, because if it's a lot of words, that's a greater odds that some of them are words that the reader's not going to be familiar with. So it stands to reason that a lower word count can make a text more comprehensible. On the other hand, though, like I've seen some novellas that have like astronomically high word counts, which are nevertheless made comprehensible through other means, such as illustrations, such as like explaining words in the text, such as using some glosses to help, things like that. Like the example I'm thinking of in particular is Ligonium, season 1, which I was shocked to when I ran the numbers that it had 800 core words, which is huge. But like it didn't really seem that way, because as I was reading it, it showed very clearly the illustrations. It was able to explain different things in the text, and it was able to take other measures towards comprehensibility that are more than just about the word count. So I think that word count is a factor, but it's not the be-all end-all by any means. As for like all of that syntax research that I did, like I feel that a lot of people, there's a what's the word? Like it's understood by people that when you shelter vocab, you also need to sort of like make the sentences super duper short. Even though you're not sheltering grammar, you're sort of like making it easier on the reader by making the sentences really, really short. But there were some studies out there, and if you're curious, I can forward them on to whoever's interested. There are studies out there that show that you don't need to like drastically simplify the syntax so long as the vocabulary is controlled for. So
sorry,
it's true.
That was
it's
my
true.
Happy Dan. Very validated here.
Right.
Thank you.
Really long sentences.
Very
because I think
validated.
it makes it choppy. So I'm like, yeah. Sorry, that was my happy dance on the mountain.
Like there was like the big one. I'm not sure how to pronounce the author's name. It's like Twiessi, Tweissi, 1998. But that author did a study where like they studied lexical simplification, syntactic simplification, and both of them together. And if I recall correctly, they found that lexical simplification was as effective in making the text comprehensible as lexical plus syntactical. In other words, like you didn't need to touch the syntax. It already, like simplifying the vocab already did the work for you. And there's another study like Gardner and Hansen 2007, I think it was, that showed similar
I'm
things.
just amazed you can bust out the names.
Off the top of your head.
But these are like,
And the year. I don't even know what year it is or how old I am. So like, that's amazing.
But those were. It shows you how many times I cited those particular studies, because it did show something that I was trying to show, that you don't need to take a machete to the syntax and have like 3 or 4 word sentences for the whole novella with no subordinate clauses at all in order to make it.
People, you don't have to just believe Rachel and me. You have also Dan and a lot of research to back this up.
All this research. And it's not, there are some studies that are a little bit more ambivalent on it, but still, like there are some. It's important to consider that like you can make the syntax a little bit more elaborate if you need to without sacrificing comprehensibility. Like Emma Vanderpool's stuff is a great example of this. I know you had her on the show a while ago, where like her sentences are really quite long on the average for a novella, and she uses quite a bit of of subordinate clauses and stuff like that, but her stuff is plenty comprehensible. And I can think of lots of other examples like that too. So yeah, I think that syntax can be a factor, but you don't need to go too far in making it extra simple for the sake of learners, so long as the vocab is controlled for it. So yeah, that's my answer to that comprehensibility question. It's a very complicated sort of thing, but it's worth having these sorts of discussions to think about it.
Well, and I think it's helpful for teachers to hear, from your research that there's not an answer to that, but also from your research that there are very specific controllable factors, and that the controllable factors aren't necessarily the ones that we immediately default to.
Exactly.
So there are a lot of people now who are moving into novella writing and who are doing it without a writing background. And so we're just sort of reinventing the wheel for ourselves. As both a researcher and a teacher, what information do you think it's important for novella writers to know?
Yeah, I think that it's just above all important to consider your audience. And for practicing teachers, and a lot of these folks getting into novella writing are practicing Latin teachers, like your audience is your students, and you know your students, you know what will be easy for them to understand and to read fluently. So like my advice, and I repeat this a lot, is just to write what works for you and your students. Like if your students can read 300, 400, 500 unique word novellas, then write 300, 400, 500 unique novellas. You don't need to like squeeze everything you want to say into less than 100 words if your students, if it's something that's accessible to your students even beyond that. Or like illustrations or glosses or certain vocabulary and stuff like that. Like don't sweat what other novella authors are doing or what other novella authors prioritize over other things. Just write what your audience, which in many cases is going to be your students, needs. And it's a lot easier to write when you have an audience in mind. I mean, I'm sure that you two, who have a much more of a writing background than I do, my writing background's practically nil, but it's it's easier to write when you have an audience in mind. And I think that that's the best advice that I can give for the next generation of novella authors, is to just like write what works for you, write what works for your students, and like it's gonna, and what you write is gonna work for some people outside your world. And it's not going to work for some people outside your world, and that's fine.
That's really true.
It's totally okay. Don't write to please others, but write to please yourself, and write to please like the Latin learners that are in your under your influence, shall we say. So yeah, that's my
Oh, I think
advice
that's
there.
such great advice,
Yeah.
to write what works for you. Because man, if it's not working for you, like that is a painful thing to write.
So when you read, and not just when you read Latin books, when you read anything, when you read journal articles, when you read, I don't know, Harlequin romance, whatever it is that you read when your baby won't stop crying in the nighttime. When you read, what do you find interesting and compelling, and do you find those things translating to the novellas that you've read, to the works in Latin that are published?
Yeah, it's I really like a good plot above all. Like just to have a nice sort of like um sequence of events that sort of that has some twists and turns to it, and like has a nice solid ending to it that's a satisfying ending. And this is something that I feel doesn't get talked about enough when it comes to comprehensibility. And this is sort of an additional answer to your comprehensibility question from earlier, is that it's not just the language that makes a story comprehensible, it's the story itself, because we, like human beings, are storytellers by nature, and we have certain conventions, and different cultures have their own conventions for stories. And it might seem, when you write for a novice audience, that your story is really trite and predictable and boring, but predictable is a good thing when you're writing for level 1 learners, because they can make predictions in their head. They can say, oh, I know what's coming, and that'll make the next sentence, the next chapter, easier for them. So I feel that it's important that the plot, that you consider the machinations of the plot pretty carefully, because like that's something that your readers are going to consider, especially if they're novice learners, to sort of make the Latin easier for them to understand. Another thing, and this goes back to the ending thing, is that like for a learner, a novice learner, and honestly for any language learner at any level, finishing a book is an enormous accomplishment. Right? No matter what your level of learning a language is, you could get a sense of satisfaction from finishing a book. Even in one's native language, one gets that satisfaction. And it's important to me that that there would be a nice, satisfying ending that sort of like ties up all the loose ends and makes it and like makes it a satisfying conclusion to the book. And it's and when there's a nice ending, it's a nice reward for the reader for having done all of that very intense work of reading a book in a second language. So it's yeah, so like having a nice solid plot with a nice solid ending, that's something that really gets me.
Okay. I think we've got time for about one question, and then we will.
I've been rambling a lot, so I apologize.
No, you're not rambling. This is beautiful. Thank you. No, but we've got time for about one more, so that we don't actually trap you here for the rest of your life in your grotto. So Rachel, I think you had one more question, right?
So on your site, you talk about the leveling of a text. Can you talk about that a little bit? Because it's sometimes a thing that we have a really hard time with as writers. I think, what audience is this for? What level?
Yeah.
I can think of the kids who can read it in my classroom, but then what does that mean outside of my classroom? Because my classroom can be its own special, magical, weird place.
Yeah. And everyone's classroom is this own special, magical, weird place. And so like it's, and it actually, with regard to the leveling question, like it's much like the question about comprehensibility from earlier. Like I don't have a solid answer for like, this is appropriate for level 1, 2, 3. Not just because one school's level 1 is different from another's, but because like it's just something that hasn't been studied. When I did like the syntactical analysis, I based it off of a study, and I can't remember the name of this one, but it's like it took a look at like graded readers that were meant for English learners in China, and it looked at the different language features that were at like a first grade level, second, third, all the way through a 12th grade, or whatever the system is in China. And it'd be great to have something like that for Latin, but we don't. So it depends on the discretion of the teacher. And so, and I'm very clear about that on the website. In the sidebar, it says level, parentheses, as suggested by author. So I don't make any claims as to like, this is level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's like, it's what the author claims. And sometimes they don't claim. And so, and so that makes it sort of difficult to classify there. Yet,
yeah, I do a lot of slashes. I'm like, Latin 1, 2, Latin 2, 3.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. And it's yet it's one of the things that Latin teachers often ask. Like in those Facebook groups, they're always like, "Oh, what novellas are appropriate for level 1?" And it's just like it's an impossible question to answer. So I put that in there because it's one of the things that I see people asking about pretty often. Like, what novellas can I grab for my level 1, class 2, 3, whatever? But like,
and I think that's why your vocab list, and it's why I provide vocab lists on my website, are so important.
Yeah.
Because vocabulary is so foundational to comprehension. So then looking at a vocab list might give you a better idea of whether your kids can read it at which level than not.
Yeah, in the first 100 words feature that I have, or anything like that. Like it's a very subjective sort of thing, leveling, and so and again, it really comes down to a sort of eye test. Like, is this one more comprehensible than that one? Like, you just have to sort of like use your gut and see what it sort of feels like. And again, it'd be cool to have some research, or even like some like classroom action research into like students' perceptions of the novellas, and like they think that this one's easy but this one's hard, and like then we could sort of like dive into that and think to myself, okay, how does this one differ from that one that they think it's harder? But like, absent that research, we can't really say. And so like I defer to the author's individual opinions, but like it's that's the best that we can do at this point.
Well, I think we need to wrap up and let you go, but I want to thank you so much for taking the time to come and chat with us and to teach us about the other side of looking at this work. This is not insight that we, I mean, as teachers or as writers, often, get a peek into. So thank you.
Yeah. But yeah, this was really fun. I'm glad you invited me, and I'm glad to be able to talk about this with people who will indulge my rambling. So that's I'm very glad.
That's
and you're actually interested in it because it's so useful.
Yeah, I'm glad that you find it useful. And if you or anyone who's listening has any suggestions for me about it, like stuff that you feel should be included that isn't, or even different ways to display or rearrange the data, like you can just find me on Twitter or on Facebook or something like that. Like I'm pretty active on those places. So like just like drop me a line there, and I'll talk your ear off about that too, because it's something that I really have enjoyed over the last few months of working on this project.
That's awesome. And that's a good reminder that we should probably give too. If there's a topic that you would like to see us addressing, or there's a question that you have, or you are Cicero, please also feel free to.
Cicero.
I'm so hoping that Cicero is going to email us. He hasn't done it yet. Please feel free to shoot us an email as well. And you'll see both our contact information and Dan's displayed at the bottom of the page. But
yes. So next time we will be talking about the tricky word laborare, and then also munera fungi, because they're tricky.
They are. Until then, go get to work. Go read some things. Go write some things. That's all of you, not just Dan. And scrivite bonis avibus.
Kate Waliatis.